He had often walked down this street before, and the pavement always stayed beneath his feet before. But then he saw her, sitting there across the way. She didn't have a lot to say, but there was something about her. And the moment that their eyes met, she realized. Another moment more, and she would be hypnotized. They were victims of the night, the chemical, physical kryptonite, helpless to the magic in the fading light. Could this really be love at first sight? Her hands were shaking, and her knees were weak, and he felt as though he could barely stand on his own 2 feet. He needed to prove this was more than a crush, convince himself it was not just a physical rush. But the power of love is a curious thing. Makes one man weep, makes another man sing. And you could say they were crazy. They didn't care about that. She put her hand in his hand, and they never looked back. Greetings, good storytellers. I am the Artful Narrator, and it is my privilege to welcome you to learning the tropes of writing. Now, love at first sight is a staple of romance, fantasy, and fairy tales. A legendary trope that holds an honored place in our imaginations due to its iconic role in beloved stories the world over. However, today we consider a question facing many romantically inclined aspiring writers. Is love at first sight too trite? Has this once great narrative device lost some of its luster through repetition? For the penchant for people and stories to spontaneously fall in love is now so well established that we often find ourselves pleasantly surprised when a story acknowledges the potentially questionable nature of this trope.
You can't marry a man you just met. You can if it's true love.
Take, for instance, the Discworld novel Mort, in which Mort, Death's aptly named apprentice, rescues a princess and quickly falls in love with her, in traditional fairy tale fashion. Then, after a few misadventures and a casual brush with the collapse of one reality, the story concludes with a wedding. However, instead of marrying this princess, whom he hardly knows, we are instead treated to a delightfully genre-savvy twist. To be frank, I thought you were going to marry the princess, spoke Death in a voice like slamming coffin lids. Mort blushed. We talked about it, he said. Then we thought, just because you happen to rescue a princess, you shouldn't rush into things. Very wise. Too many young women leap into the arms of the first young man to wake them after 100 years' sleep, for example. And in a little gem from the 1940s called The Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer, a teen-aged Shirley Temple plays Susan, a high school girl who seemingly falls in love at first sight with the dashing Richard, played by none other than Cary Grant. However, Susan's guardians recognize that this is just an adolescent infatuation with an older man. But rather than making a martyr out of Richard by forbidding Susan to see him, they instead convince Richard to go out on a few harmless dates with Susan to allow her to get over her crush.
For instance, if I wanted to capture the feeling of America, it wouldn't be necessary to go looking for towering mountains or fields of waving grain. I try to put America on canvas in the picture of one of you. You'd be in your denims, with a cuffs rolled up and the shirt open at the neck. You'd be young, eager, and proud.
Now that we have given ear to tales poking fun at this trope, let us give equal time to examining examples of its benefits. For love at first sight can drive a story's plot with a far more hopeful and eloquent hand than alternatives, such as the allure of long-lost treasure, or the dastardly doings of a villain. Such was the case in the delightful, romantic screwball comedy What's Up, Doc?, where Barbara Streisand's Judy is smitten by love at first sight and spends the rest of the plot trying to win the heart and hand of the hapless Howard Bannister.
You bring havoc and chaos to everyone, but why to me? Why me? Why? Why?
Because you look cute in your pajamas, Steve.
Moreover, in their grandest iterations, stories that utilize this trope grant us the means to experience, through the characters on page or screen, the rare and wonderful joy of that electric moment when your eyes meet another's and the beating of your heart leaves little room for doubt that this could be anything but love at first sight. A feat which Disney's Sleeping Beauty somehow managed to perfectly translate into one truly magical song. But there is a third vital facet to this concept. For while it is a trope in narrative, love at first sight is also a thing that, no matter how rare, happens in real life. Such was the case for the great man Arnold Palmer, who met Winnie Walzer on Tuesday and proposed to her on Saturday, after which they went on to be happily married for 45 years.
When I won the prize for the tournament, I got Winnie too.
And some wonder if Tolkien himself might in fact have been enchanted by such a wondrous spell when first he met Edith Bratt, the woman who would become his wife. For it is a fact that upon Edith's grave he had the name Luthien inscribed, and so too was the name Baron placed upon his gravestone when his time came. The names originating from one of Tolkien's stories, in which a mortal man, Baron, saw the elf maiden Luthien dancing in a glade of hemlocks and fell deeply in love. A meeting whose details are said to closely parallel a real event in which Edith danced and sang for Tolkien in a wood of hemlocks.
'Tis the lay of Luthien, the elf maiden who gave her love to Beren.
However, while love at first sight is possible, just like many things featured in stories, Hollywood and literary narratives can often present something as being so common that it feels exaggerated or borderline fictional in the wake of the accumulated history of tropes and their implementation.
Oh, no chance, no way, I won't say it, no, no. You swoon, you sigh, why deny it? Uh-oh. It's still cliche, I won't say I'm in love.
So again, the question gnaws at us. Is love at first sight too trite? Well, I believe that by itself, this trope is still a strong addition to a well-written story. However, some tropes are used together so frequently that we sometimes forget to question if such a pairing is relevant to our present situation. So it is that I contend that this perceived triteness is partially the fault of a trope that often accompanies love at first sight. I am speaking, of course, of the implication that the loving couple often get married after only knowing each other for a comparatively short time. Now, like many well-established tropes, this one comes to us from fairy tales. Such tales themselves originating in a time where marriages of convenience were commonplace, especially among the heirs of nobles. And as such, marriages between people who barely knew each other's names were not seen as strange or narratively of note.
My name's Adam Ponity.
Odd name, I must say.
How about marrying me? Oh, I know, it's kind of short notice.
And even when removed from fairy tale settings, the perpetuation of this accompanying trope may perhaps be the fault of the truncated nature of narrative, which wishes to present us with a story that hits all the high notes to give us a succinct and satisfying ending, which, for a tale with core themes of romance, would logically be the wedding. And while we are willing to believe in the magic of love at first sight, or, at worst, excuse it as nothing more than a passing infatuation, we seemingly are more likely, with our modern sensibilities, to see quick weddings as a sign that the couple is rushing into things too hastily, and may live to regret it. So I would advise that we use love at first sight respectfully, in stories where it acts as a merit to the plot, rather than just an expedience. But, moreover, that we abstain from marrying our love interests off too briskly, in favor of perhaps just having them move in together, or at the very least, employing a scene transition that informs the audience that some time has passed, so that the wedding can then commence in all its splendor.
That just happens to be how I feel about it. What do you think?
Admittedly, I am very much a romantic, so my views on this trope may be a trifle swayed. And as such, I would dearly love to hear your thoughts on this question of love at first sight, and its possible triteness. But until then, thank you very much for watching. I hope that this video has been informative, or at the very least, a pleasant diversion. Until next time.